welcome back to my channel. I'm Ivana, I'm a librarian and a library student, and I'm here to share my favorite books of 2024. So I didn't think this year was all that great in terms of reading, but then I went back to my reading journal and I really reflected, and I found that there were actually a lot of really good books that I read this year. I think this year has just been wild for me with so much going on at school and work and life, so I'm really excited to share the books that made the most impact to me. Now, I'm a really fickle person. My favorite books right now might change in a couple days or in an hour, but this is as of right now, as of January 5th, 2025. These are my favorite books of 2024. In addition to being very fickle, I'm very indecisive. I think those go hand in hand, and I'm a really seeing the forest for the trees kind of person, or is it the other way around? I focus a lot on little details, and so some books, while they're not perfect or while they might not be 100% my cup of tea, still got me to think a lot. So I'm gonna start with these honorable mention books. The first book that I want to share that's an honorable mention is PENANCE by Eliza Clarke. I was attracted to this book by its cover. I started it because I was sick. I needed an audiobook to distract me from my life, and this book follows a crooked journalist who has a tragic backstory of his own, and he is examining what happened to a girl who was set on fire at a seaside town in the UK. And it turns out that this girl is actually set on fire by her own friends. So he digs deep into the lives of her friends and into the ecosystem of this town to figure out why the girls did it, what their motivations were, and to make some money. He fictionalizes a lot of what happened. He takes a lot of liberties when he's telling the story just to get more attention and to make the story sound more interesting. The book itself could be thought of as a critique of true crime because it really does make this guy sound really bad, but it also leads us to think about how society itself tends to also glamorize people who have done really f***ed up things. Like, one of the girls, we find out, and this isn't a spoiler, is really into this one person who the school. It also gets into Tumblr and online communities and how those communities can also bring out the worst in people. This book was dark, it was gritty, it was about girlhood, it was about society's obsession with serial killers, and it left such a big impression on me that I want to see more of what Eliza Clarke has to offer. I'm also just biased because I like a book about adolescence, and a quote I want to leave you with is, "There's a bit of you that's always a teenager, isn't there? It's the most traumatic time for loads of people's lives, and even the most healthy and put together adults are still there." I feel like I have so many quotes from other books this year that are about that, but it's true. The next thought-provoking book I want to highlight is El País bajo mi piel, or The Country Under My Skin by Gioconda Belli. This is a memoir. I read it in Spanish. Gioconda Belli is a poet from Nicaragua. She's still alive, she's still with us. And she was a Sandinista, and she was raised in an upper-class household, and she becomes an informant for the Sandinistas during the time of Anastasia Somoza Garcia's dictatorship. This book was thought-provoking in that it made me realize that I don't know enough about Latin America, and it really just made me want to learn more about it. I feel like oftentimes when we talk about Latina authors or memoirs by Latinas, it's typically like an immigration story, and while she does move to the United States and she also lives in Spain, I believe, this isn't a story of immigration. This is a story of resistance. This is a story about motherhood. This is a story about giving into your passions and being unfaithful. This is about life and death. This is about the power of poetry, and so this book was really enlightening. It also subverted the expectations of Latin American women. It was really nice to see a woman like Gioconda Belli, who was Latina and just didn't give a f about society's expectations. Like, granted, she grew up very wealthy. She's a very privileged woman, but she is an example of someone who uses her privilege to support a good cause and to support her fellow Nicaraguans. So I just really love that book, and I want to highlight it because I don't think enough people have read it. And if you are a lover of memoirs, I recommend that you check this one out. The next thought-provoking honorable mention book is Annie Ernaux's A Girl's Story. Annie Ernaux is one of my favorite authors. I read Look at the Lights, My Love recently, and I hated it. So she might be my favorite author, but she definitely has some misses. But A Girl's Story definitely hit. I felt such a connection to Annie and all of the things that she was going through. It recapped recounts a time in her life when she was 19 and she went to a summer camp. She talks about her first sexual encounter, how she lost herself in her infatuation with someone else, and is it really the person or is it just the idea of being wanted that drew her to this guy. She talks about bulimia and her desires as a woman, and how at 14 or at 19 she was living the best time of her life and she didn't even realize it until much later, now that she's recounting this story. Now, this story was a little uneven. The second half didn't draw me in as much as the first, but I do feel such a connection with her, and this is the kind of book that personally I ended up reflecting so much on. I wrote a journal entry after reading this book because it really stuck with me. Like, she even talks about how she was so proud of her sexual exploits that she took her lipstick and wrote "Long live whores" on a bathroom mirror. I make it sound so silly. It's not. She's definitely deeper than how I'm painting her. But if you like reading about the impact that adolescence has had on people's futures, then this is a good one for you. Or if you were a wild child like me. Okay. So we're on to our top 10. These are going to be presented in random order, and I don't think a single one of these books was published in 2024, but we're gonna roll with it. So my first favorite book of the year was If an Egyptian Cannot Speak English by Noor Naga. This was a stunning look at identity politics and love, and it was dealt with in such a nuanced way. This book follows an unnamed Egyptian American protagonist as she decides to go to Egypt, her family's home country. She has roots there, but she has never actually visited. Or maybe she has, but she hasn't stayed there for an extended amount of time. I'm not sure, but in any case, she is going there. She does not speak Arabic fluently. She wants to explore where her family came from. So she has that curiosity and she decides to get a job, or her parents are pretty well connected. Her mom helps her get a job teaching English, and she is like pretty woke by US standards, and she considers herself to have a really good moral compass. She can tell right from wrong. She's a very black and white thinking of that, and all of that goes to when she arrives in Egypt. She realizes that her positionality really shifts as an Egyptian United Statesian woman with money in Egypt. The things that felt so crystal clear, black and white, don't feel like that anymore. I feel like a lot of people in the diaspora here in the United States can really relate to the protagonist whenever they go back. I think that many of us have such US-centric ways of viewing the world. Things become a lot more complex when you leave the States and you go to a different culture. And even if that is your own culture, there's layers to things. And I'm being so vague right now, but I totally related to this book. It reminds me of me trying to explain things to my parents in Spanish and not finding the correct words, because these are words that have been repeated to me in English, and even though I'm a fluent Spanish speaker, I still struggle to express some quote-unquote progressive values. But we're getting carried away now. The second narrator in this book is an Egyptian man, a young man, who lived through the Arab Spring and actually sold photographs to CNN and other news outlets that showed this uprising. It's years later, he's dependent on drugs, he doesn't have a lot of money, he has had a lot of traumatic things happen to him, and he meets the unnamed female character and they start a relationship. It's a total show, and I loved every second of it. I loved all of the themes explored in this book. I also really liked how this book was split up into 3 parts. The first part is like question and answer, so it's like little vignettes. The second part also has vignettes, but it includes a lot of footnotes that explain different cultural things. And then the third part is, I actually don't want to give away the third part, but it's very meta. So let's just leave it at that. I think that sometimes the best books leave you with more questions than answers, and this is that type of book. So if you're the kind of person who likes that and doesn't like things to be neat and tidy, I think this would be an excellent book for you to read. It's harrowing, it's beautifully written, it's just masterfully crafted. The next book I want to talk about is a classic, and I wasn't expecting to love it as much as I did, and it is Wuthering Heights by Emily Brontë. I read this with my students and other coworkers and friends. We read 50 pages a week for book club, and we decided on this book because we felt like it was spooky and it was almost Halloween, and I don't know, I think this might be my favorite classic. It is a gothic tale that centers on the brooding Heathcliff who randomly shows up at Wuthering Heights as a kid, and he's taken in by the Ernaux family. The patriarch of the family takes a liking to him. His children are Catherine and I forgot his name but Catherine's brother, who does not like Heathcliff. And Catherine and Heathcliff, even though they are in different positions, they're still really drawn to each other, and there are some romantic links there, but they can't be together. And so it's just like a really f***ed up, full of passion story about the metaphorical as well as the literal ghosts that haunt us. Everybody in this book was extremely annoying and not a good person. A lot of the story is told by my favorite character in the book, Nellie. She's one of the servants in the family, and she gets to know Catherine and her daughter Kathy very, very well as Heathcliff. And so you get to hear all of this juicy gossip, all of like the relationship is so messed up, but the book itself is so atmospheric. It is stunningly beautiful. There are passages that I underlined that just took my breath away. It really just stole my heart. I feel oftentimes as an educator, I'm always caught between teenagers' drama, and this is what it felt like. So I really related to Nellie. I don't think I'm doing this book justice. I would just say that if you like drama, if you like telenovelas, if you like spooky settings, I would say check this one out. So my next favorite book I talked about in my last wrap up, and it is La Hija Única, or Stillborn by Guadalupe Nettel. I really enjoyed this book. It centers motherhood, 3 different women who have different viewpoints of motherhood, who have had different experiences with motherhood, and what brings them together. This is a book that I certainly want to reread because I lost the plot a little bit, but I just remember feeling so moved by it and it being such a sweet story that wasn't cloyingly sweet. I don't want to say much about what happens in the story because I feel like it would be a spoiler, but there's a lot of commentary on abortion, euthanasia, support for mothers, and it was just a very thought-provoking, stunning book. My next favorite book I also talked about in my last wrap-up, and it's PIRANESI by Susanna Clarke. This book was haunting. I feel like I keep using that word, but it was haunting. It was murky. I didn't know where it was going. It was unlike anything I have read. It is technically a fantasy. It's very literary though, and it's about labyrinths. It's about the impact of trauma. It's a book that I also don't want to describe too much because I don't want to give anything away, but it is a book that just drops you in a place that you know nothing about. It's like a thriller or a mystery, but also not, and you just get to be in the mind of PIRANESI, and he's such a lovable character. It's about loving the environment and treating people with respect. It's about having integrity, and that's all I'm gonna say. My next favorite book of the year is another book set in Egypt, and it is SHUBEIK, LUBEIK. It's a graphic novel that was originally written in Arabic, and it's also fantasy. It follows 3 interrelated stories of people living in an Egypt where you can actually purchase wishes, but of course some of them come with consequences because the wishes have different tiers to them, and the crappier wishes lead to some messed up results. One of the greatest parts of this book was the world building. It was so well developed and fleshed out. It also had really strong depictions of mental health issues, including depression. It had a lot of commentary on social class. It was also so funny. I'm gonna say it again, I shared this in my first review, but in one of the opening scenes, a woman says she wants to lose weight and she purchases a 3rd-class wish, and she's like, okay, I want to lose this amount of kilos, and she loses like 3 limbs. It's just really funny and also really sad, and it is a really long and big book, and it is also really text heavy, but honestly it was worth reading and it has left such an impact on me, and any chance I get I recommend it to people. So check that out if you're into graphic novels and if you're looking for a fantasy book that is very original. My next favorite book of the year is a nonfiction book, and it is the autobiography of Malcolm X as told to Alex Haley. This book, I've been meaning to read it for years, and it wasn't until a student asked me to buddy read it with them that I actually did it, and I feel like I learned so much. The book is told in such a great voice. Alex Haley really worked Malcolm X's personality on there. He's very sharp, he is very brilliant, he's very funny, he's a little unhinged at times. I remember, and I don't think I mentioned this in my review of it originally, but I remember in one part he talks about how he was so willing to die for his cause that he played Russian roulette, and I just remember reading that passage and telling Dan about it and being like, oh my gosh, he could have just died. I don't even understand what the context of him playing Russian roulette was, and I think he only did it himself. But in the afterword, which is so worth reading, he talks about how he kind of made that up and embellished a little bit, but I digress. This book focuses on his extraordinary life, how he faced so many hardships and the different events in his life that really radicalized him. He was famously against integration and had a lot of opinions that were so starkly different from MLK's. I feel like this book had a little bit of everything. It was dramatic, it was thought-provoking. He really is one of the greatest thinkers in US history. This is such an accessible look at Malcolm X's life and teachings. If you care about equity and justice and why things are the way that they are right now in the United States, I think this is a must read. If you're easily intimidated by things like I am, I would say check out the audiobook by Lawrence Fishburne because it is expertly narrated and it was just so good. So not only was it good in the sense of like learning more about what Malcolm X believed, but the way that it was crafted was really beautifully done, and it's just an excellent read. My next fave is This Is How You Lose the Time More, and this book has been around for so long and it's really popular, and I finally got to it. I'm seeing a trend of some of my favorite books being books that I've been intimidated by. Like I was intimidated by PIRANESI and the autobiography of Malcolm X, and I was also deeply intimidated by this book, even though it's really slim. This is a sci-fi speculative time travel fiction that's also a sapphic romance. I read this book on the perfect spring day. I took a ferry into the city and read it on my way to the city, and then I took a ferry back home. But little did I know it was the wrong ferry. I ended up like miles and miles away from my home, and I read almost the entirety of this book on that ferry ride, and it just made it all that more impactful. So the book follows two agents, Blue and Red, who are basically fighting each other through time and space, and they communicate through letters that self-destruct. I was really confused reading this. The prose is beautifully written, but I didn't really understand what was going on for 65% of the book, and then after that 65% mark I was like, oh, I get it now. This is a spy versus spy novella that was just so romantic and beautiful, and I highly recommend it if you are into flowery prose. I feel like this is a book-alike to Our Wives Under the Sea. I think that they're both incredibly romantic and beautifully crafted, but this one is a little murkier. So if you liked Our Wives Under the Sea, I recommend this for you too. My next favorite book was Minor Detail by Adania Shibli, and this book was originally written in Arabic. It follows an Israeli soldier and a journalist who is uncovering an atrocious act the Israeli soldier committed against a girl, I think you can probably imagine, in the past during the 1-year anniversary of the Nakba. This book just felt so visceral. Like I felt it with my whole body. I felt really on edge in each perspective. Like being in the mind of someone who's like terrorizing a group of people, being in the mind of a Zionist is so f***ed up, but also being in the mind of a Palestinian journalist who is constantly being surveilled because her country's under occupation is stressful. This book explores so many ideas about borders, about the personal versus the public, about life and trauma. It really just left such a deep impression on me, and it's so short. I don't want to give too much away. Just check it out. My 8th favorite book in 2024 really surprised me, and it was Migrations by Charlotte McConaughey. This This book is set in Greenland in the not so distant future, and it's at sea, and it's about a woman who has a death wish, who is tracking the last Arctic terns in the world as they do their last migration. She does anything she can to track them. She even gets on a ship with fishermen, and fishing is illegal now because there are not enough fish in the world, and she embarks on this journey with these people whose values she doesn't agree with, just so she can track these birds. This book was really compelling. It was very character driven, but also had a lot of plot. It's very atmospheric as well. It's hopeless, it's icy. I actually read this during like a false snow day. I just sat in bed and like tandem listened to the audiobook and read it, and it was an extraordinary experience. I read it in a sitting. This book had dual timelines that I cared about. It had romance, tension, yearning, mystery. It also had a lot of commentary on climate change. It's maybe my first cli-fi book, and I cannot wait to read more from this author. This book wasn't perfect, but it still managed to leave such an impression on me, and I hope to read it sometime in the future. It's perfect for like the winter time as well. And my final favorite book of the year is I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Hartman. This book was written in 1995. It's translated from French. Hartman was Belgian, and it's about a young woman who is trapped in an underground bunker. She has no name, she has no recollection of where she came from, and she's there with women who are older and who do remember the before. This book is dystopian. It doesn't have any chapters, so it's just like a continuous stream of thoughts and things that happen, but that didn't deter me from reading it at all. I did read it really slowly even though it was short, and I savored it, which I loved. This book is less about the plot and more about the character's interiority. It's a very philosophical book. It asks us to question what it means to be human. What does companionship look like? It's a really, really haunting and eerie novel that has me wanting to pick it back up. I feel like the best books are the kinds of books that you want to reread. I recently saw this in a bookstore and I almost bought it so I could reread it because I'm so mad that I don't have an annotated copy. But yeah, this was just a very introspective, observational book that has stuck with me. So yeah, there you have it. Those are my favorite books of 2024. Please let me know if you have any recommendations for me and what your favorite books were. I'm always looking for new reads. I'm really happy to get rid of my journal, or like to put it away and start a new one. I'm already having such a great reading year in 2025, and I hope that you are too. If you liked my video, please feel free to subscribe and give it a thumbs up. I appreciate you, and I hope to see you in my next video. Bye!